application process is now open for the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. It means students are looking ahead to next year. Of course, it looks like the start of the academic year for higher education for 2021 will be delayed as a result of the pandemic. You've got to add to that what's happening in schools, because a lot of it's going to depend on what happens with matric exams. Well, Thabo Shingange is the spokesperson for the South African Union of Students. Thabo, good afternoon to you. Firstly, NSFAS opening applications yesterday for funding for next year. Is it ready to receive these applications from what you're aware of?
Good afternoon, Stephen, and to the viewers. Thank you very much for having us. Firstly, with regards to NSFAS opening applications, I think it's important firstly to welcome the opening of applications as it speaks to the funding and access of thousands of students who cannot afford higher education in South Africa. However, of course, like you rightfully started off by saying, a lot of it depends on the challenges that are being experienced currently, not only in higher education with the backlogs, some universities, for instance, starting with the second semester, while others have not even started with the first semester, for instance, Fort Hare University, with the growing challenges as well in basic education surrounding the matriculants, whom would be part and parcel of the first entries come the academic year 2021, which in and of itself is not yet concluded. Whether or not it's going to go, the 2020 academic year might go into 2021, what does that mean in terms of the applications? However, what we're at least hoping to do is to buy time. So by opening the applications now, maybe even prolong the closing date to be able to perhaps even deal with some of these mitigating challenges, both in basic and higher education sector, before the whole process is closed and finalized.
Okay, we're going to move to the academic year in just a moment. But first, NSFAS had huge problems a year, 18 months ago. Dr. Randall Carolison came in. It seems to be coming right. Have you seen an improvement?
Look, as a union of students, of course, we will continue to agitate for more improvement in terms of being able to broaden up access to a number of students. I mean, NSFAS might not be perfect as a system. You're correct in saying that there has been meaningful improvement insofar as the last administration was concerned, and the relative strides that have been taken by the NSFAS team under administration led by, I think, Dr. Randall Carolison, to make the process much more smooth. I mean, we've seen, for instance, the issue of allowances and learning material being given to the students themselves, that enabling them to be more agents of economic activity and so forth. Those are some of the improvements that we've seen. But of course, there's always room for improvement. I mean, there's always going to be a student with challenges. For instance, even before this particular call, I was on the phone with the mother of Asamahlendaba, who's one of the students, for instance, whereby the glitches in the system, they pick up that the parent earns more than 350, whereas the parent earns below 350, and failing to reconcile that leaves that particular student compromised. So insofar as we have an example of Asamahlendaba, as a student union, will continue to agitate up until even for that particular student, the question of free education is realized quite smoothly as our generational mission.
Okay, the academic year for tertiary next year, when do you think it should start? I mean, I realize it's difficult to know. A lot could change. What we do need to do, and I imagine you'll agree with me, Thabo, is we need to get students moving through the system. We don't want a backlog. I mean, we don't want what could happen at schools happening in higher institutions. Do you think March, April?
Look, the question about opening of schools is of course quite a tricky terrain. For instance, even in higher education, let's never mind the challenges in basic education. As SAUS, we're condemning what seems to be a two-tier system of higher education that is developing, where we're seeing an education system that is advancing for your most historically white advantaged institutions, which have successfully completed online examinations, online teaching and learning and so forth, at the expense of, for instance, historically disadvantaged institutions who have not even started the first semester. So we're seeing at this juncture, we don't even know when the academic year is going to end and for who is it going to end for first. And I think those are part of the issues and concerns we have insofar as driving a single coordinated higher education sector is concerned in this country. So, I mean, there is, of course, room for broader engagement involving NSFAS, involving the Department of Basic Education, involving student formations that speak to basic education as well, and involving higher education stakeholders in terms of finding some collective umbrella educational approach of this country, bearing in mind our socioeconomic challenges and the vast inequalities that characterize most of our country and our higher education institutions as microcosms of society.
I mean, the way we all live has changed. I mean, you know, people are learning at home, people are working from home, people are Zooming. I mean, someone said to me the other day that the quote of the year is probably, sorry, I had my microphone on mute. Okay, do you think that some students are going to want to keep studying online? Do you think we could be on the cusp of a whole new sector opening up that is going to make education easier and cheaper for millions of people? I understand completely the problems of data, I get it. But it could still become a lot cheaper for people who want to study to actually study further than it has been up until now?
Look, Stephen, the question of education in South Africa, unfortunately, is a historically and politically loaded question, and the struggle for transformation in South Africa can't be devoid of our economic challenges. So, for instance, even the discussion around online education, yes, we must be fair to say that online education might provide some better alternative, maybe even cheaper modes of providing teaching and learning. However, insofar as the vast South Africans are in poverty and so forth, they become excluded by this shift to online education, as we're experiencing now, for instance, with the online classes. Yes, there are a number of students who are benefiting from online classes and must not necessarily be stopped from benefiting from new technologies, new innovations, and so forth, as we are driving our country forward. However, it cannot be that we are having a situation where education can only be available for a select few who in the main might be privileged, relatively speaking, in comparison to the broader students. I mean, for instance, if you have about 14 institutions currently experiencing challenges out of 26 public universities, that is telling you that the majority of not only the majority of the institutions, but majority of students as well are unable to shift to these online platforms and opportunities. Maybe online education, online learning is the future, not just for South Africa, but for the globe. However, the pace at which we're shifting to this online education needs to be mindful of our local and domestic realities, which insofar leave little to inspire, in as much as higher education and online learning is involved, and broadening access to the thousands of South Africans, most of which come from poor and working class backgrounds.
And I mean, in the end, what you really want, and the reason that people go to university, is they want to join the middle class. It's completely understandable. It's what everyone wants to do, particularly if you look at our rates. Well, sure, to get knowledge. But let me sort of make a broader point. What we need to do, I mean, you know, I think it's in the Freedom Charter. The doors of learning must be open to all. We want to do that. To do that requires proper management. It requires data. It requires, you know, gadgets. It requires quite a lot of things, but it also requires society to work together and to give it resources.
No, you're very much correct, but I want to start with the assumption that universities in particular are to fall into the category of the missing middle, primarily to investigate the essence of a university is for knowledge production. It's the minute we begin to view it as a way to shift into a middle class, we're beginning to commercialize education, which has been a struggle for so long in South African student movement. However, that is not to say that we are not mindful of the many economic opportunities and prospects that come with having a higher education qualification. But that should not be a driving factor towards pushing for students. Ultimately, universities should remain as a center for knowledge production and solving societal issues, not necessarily leaning towards market interests. I think insofar as that, I lost sight of your second question, if you can just refresh it quickly. What I was getting to is it requires a whole national effort to improve the lives of young people, to give them a chance to enter the society. You do that properly, you grow the economy, is kind of where I was headed, and this takes us straight to the problem of unemployed graduates at the moment as well. Look, I mean, you're very much correct. There's a lot that society needs to collectively be doing in terms of assisting the transformation project in higher education, not just higher education, society. I mean, all of these things are multifaceted. You were talking about youth unemployment, for instance. Now we have a large number of unemployed graduates, many of which, for instance, you'll find out cannot get funding for postgraduate qualifications, where you find out that the market, for instance, or job opportunities require postgraduate qualifications. So the shortage of funding for postgraduate students feeds into, for instance, an issue of high youth unemployment, even though people have qualifications, which makes it even more critical, the question around free education, to be expanded not just to your first degree, but to speak to issues of postgraduate education. For instance, we say that we have a few numbers of black PhDs, few numbers of women holding these PhDs in particular roles, yet we are failing to put in the necessary resources to see that as an outcome. So we find a problem, but we're not necessarily working towards systemically dealing with this particular issue. This is what requires stakeholders, unions, students, and various, interested people in terms of higher education to say, how do we better drive society and South African youth development forward?